Senator Adam Schiff walked onto the View set expecting applause. What he got instead was 60 minutes that ended his political career. Live on ABC. Here's what you need to know. Schiff came to sell his book, Lessons from the Brink. Senator John Kennedy came with 5 folders. Inside those folders were mortgage fraud referrals, censure resolutions, and transcripts that would unravel 9 years of carefully constructed narrative. By the time Kennedy finished reading, Schiff couldn't pick up his own pen. 300 progressive Manhattan women stood and applauded. Not for Schiff, but for the country lawyer who had just dismantled him. Stay with this. Every word that follows is documented and public record. The View Studio, West 66th Street, Manhattan, Tuesday morning, 11 Eastern. 3 cameras circling the famous curved table. The audience, 300 women who'd stood in line on Columbus Avenue at dawn, most wearing progressive pins, most expecting a victory lap for their California senator. Whoopi Goldberg at the head of the table, Joy Behar to her left, cracking jokes she'd been perfecting for 28 years. Sonny Hostin, the former federal prosecutor, the only person at that table who'd actually cross-examined witnesses in a real courtroom. Sarah Haynes, the political moderate kept on staff for ratings balance. To Whoopi's right sat Senator Adam Schiff, 65 years old, charcoal 3-piece suit, light blue silk tie, the Mont Blanc pen he'd carried for 23 years sitting beside his water bottle. 3 copies of his new memoir stacked in front of him for the cover shot. And beside Schiff, Senator John Kennedy, 74 years old, faded charcoal suit that had ridden in a Delta overhead bin from New Orleans that morning at 5:30. Wire-rimmed glasses, a tie his wife picked out the night before, and that briefcase, the same beat-up leather case he'd carried into Senate hearings since the Obama administration, tucked between his ankles where the floor-level camera would catch it. Whoopi opened warm, the way she does for guests she's certain will entertain. "Senators, welcome to The View. Senator Schiff, your book is climbing the charts. Tell us why you wrote it." Schiff smiled. He picked up his copy, held it for the cameras. "Whoopi, thank you. I wrote this book because the country is at a turning point. We have a fascist movement, not a future one, a present one. Donald Trump is the Mussolini of Mar-a-Lago. He's taken over the Republican Party, weaponized the Department of Justice against his political enemies, sent the National Guard against American children at the border, stripped our intelligence community of every honest professional, and replaced them with loyalists. We're living the fall of a republic in real time." The audience clapped. Schiff had the rhythm of a man who'd delivered this speech on 40 different sets in 18 months. He let the applause settle. "My book is the story of how we fought back, the first impeachment, the Russia investigation, the defense of our democratic institutions against an authoritarian and his enablers." Then he turned slowly, didn't look at Kennedy, looked at Whoopi. And Whoopi, speaking of enablers, I want to be honest with the audience today. I'm surprised, genuinely surprised, that the network thought it appropriate to put me on the same stage as the gentleman to my right. Whoopi's eyebrows went up. The audience leaned forward. Senator Kennedy is a relic of a Louisiana that no longer exists in 2026. He affects a folksy accent that is, charitably, a costume. He pretends to be a country lawyer who happened into the Senate by accident. He's actually a graduate of Vanderbilt and Oxford, and he spent his entire career using the disguise of folksy ignorance to advance the most extreme positions of his party. Joy Behar pointed at Kennedy. "That's right." 2 women in the front row whooped. "He's called for the prosecution of teachers, the deportation of children. He's voted against every climate measure in the last decade, voted to gut Medicaid 4 times. He is, in every meaningful way, an enabler of the fascism Donald Trump represents. He's on the wrong side of history, and the country will remember that when the history books are written." Schiff turned finally to look at Kennedy. "Senator, with respect, you should be embarrassed to share this stage with me. The voters of Louisiana sent you here. The voters of California sent me here. They're not the same country. They will not be remembered the same way." The audience erupted. Whoopi let it run for 10 full seconds before raising her hand. "Senator Kennedy, your response." Kennedy adjusted his glasses with one finger, didn't look at Schiff, looked at Whoopi, spoke quietly, slowly, the drawl thick. "Ma'am, I appreciate the welcome. Senator Schiff over there reminds me of an alligator I had once." He paused. "Real talker, right up till the moment I started counting his teeth." The studio went quiet for a beat, then a single laugh from the back row, then more, then 30 people. Whoopi's face did something it hadn't done on television in 3 years, broke into a real, surprised smile. Kennedy reached down between his feet and lifted the briefcase onto his lap. "Now, Whoopi, Senator Schiff has a book to sell. I respect that. I write a book every couple years myself. But before we talk about his book, I think we ought to talk about something the publisher left out of the back cover." He set the briefcase on the curved table. The leather made a small sound against the wood. He clicked the latches open. 2 clicks, loud in the quiet that had followed the laughter. "Let's talk about Senator Schiff's houses." Schiff's smile faltered. The Mont Blanc pen between his thumb and forefinger tapped twice against the table. The first folder was brown. The seal on the front read, "Federal Housing Finance Agency, Mortgage Fraud Referral, Case MF-2024-1847. Kennedy laid it on the table without opening it. Let it sit there. 3 full seconds. "Senator Schiff, you own 3 properties. A house in Burbank, California, purchased 1997, current value approximately $2.1 million. A condominium in Burbank, purchased 2006, current value $780,000. And a house in Kensington, Maryland, purchased February of 2021 for $865,000. He opened the folder. "Now, Senator, when you bought that Maryland house in February 2021, you were a sitting member of the United States House of Representatives representing California's 28th District. You were required by federal law to file a financial disclosure. You filed that disclosure in May of 2021. On that disclosure, you listed the Maryland house as, and I quote, residential property. You did not list it as your primary residence." Kennedy pulled the first document. "But, Senator, 3 months later, in August of 2021, you refinanced that Maryland house. You took out a new mortgage with Navy Federal Credit Union. On that mortgage application, Senator, you signed a federal document under penalty of perjury stating that the Maryland house was, and I quote, borrower's primary residence." He set the document down. Let it breathe. "Now, Senator, which was it? Was the Maryland house your primary residence as you told the mortgage company? Or was it not your primary residence as you told the United States House of Representatives on your financial disclosure 3 months earlier?" Silence. The Mont Blanc pen stopped tapping. "Because, Senator, those are 2 different legal statements under oath to 2 different federal agencies in the same calendar year. One of them is accurate. The other one is federal mortgage fraud. A felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1014, punishable by up to 30 years in federal prison." The studio, 300 Manhattan women, went very still. Kennedy wasn't done. "And, Senator, here's the part that matters to the folks watching at home. If you claimed Maryland as your primary residence on that mortgage, you got a lower interest rate. Primary residence mortgages get better terms than investment property mortgages. You saved approximately $47,000 over the life of that loan by checking that box." He pulled another sheet. "But, Senator, if Maryland was your primary residence in August 2021, then California was not your primary residence. And if California was not your primary residence, you were not eligible under the California Constitution to represent California's 28th District in the United States Congress. Whoopi Goldberg's face, the camera caught it, went from warm host to something else, something careful. Senator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency referred your mortgage application to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland in November of 2023. That referral is public. It's case number MF-2024-1847. The U.S. Attorney impaneled a grand jury in March of 2024. That grand jury is still active. Kennedy looked at Schiff over his glasses. Senator, are you under federal investigation for mortgage fraud? Schiff's hand went to the Mont Blanc pen. He picked it up. He set it down. He picked it up again. That matter is, I cannot comment on ongoing legal matters. Senator, it's a yes or no question. Are you currently under federal grand jury investigation? My counsel has advised me not to discuss. Senator, your counsel is not sitting at this table. You are. The American people are watching, yes or no? Schiff did not answer. Kennedy closed the brown folder, stacked it neatly on the table. We'll come back to that. Let's talk about Russia. The second folder was blue. The seal read, Transcripts, Public Television Archive, 2017 to 2020. Kennedy laid it on the table without opening it. Let it sit for 3 seconds. Senator Schiff, between January 2017 and April 2020, you appeared on national television approximately 247 times to discuss the Russia investigation. I'm not counting radio, not counting podcasts, just television. He opened the folder. On at least 53 of those appearances, you stated in some form that you had personally seen evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. He pulled the first transcript. March 20th, 2017. Meet the press. Chuck Todd asks if you have evidence beyond circumstantial. You say, quote, there is evidence that is not circumstantial, and it's very much worthy of investigation, end quote. Next transcript. December 17th, 2017. CNN, Jake Tapper, quote, the most palpable evidence of collusion, end quote. Next, March 22nd, 2018, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, quote, we have direct evidence that I cannot disclose at this time, end quote. He let 3 more transcripts pass without reading them, just placing them on the pile. Senator, you used the word evidence in connection with collusion 53 times across 3 years on national television. You did so as the ranking Democrat on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, a position that gave you access to classified material no other member of Congress had access to. The American people watched you on their televisions, and they trusted you because you said you had seen the evidence. He set the transcripts down. Then, in April 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, Republican FBI Director under George W. Bush, decorated Marine combat veteran of Vietnam, released his final report. 448 pages, 2.5 years of investigation, $40 million, 45 FBI agents, 3,000 subpoenas, 500 witnesses. He pulled the conclusion page. Quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. End quote. The studio was quiet. Senator, did not establish. That's the legal phrase used by federal prosecutors when they've looked at the evidence and determined that no crime can be charged. It's the strongest negative finding a prosecutor can make. Schiff opened his mouth. Kennedy raised one finger. Now hold on, Senator. I ain't done. Because 4 years later, in May 2023, Special Counsel John Durham, also Republican, also a career federal prosecutor, released his report on the origins of the Russia probe. The investigation you went on television 53 times to defend. He pulled the Durham conclusion. Quote, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was opened on raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated intelligence. End quote. Quote, The FBI failed to uphold its mission of strict fidelity to the law." End quote. He let that sit longer. "Senator, you had access to that intelligence. You sat on the House Intelligence Committee. You read the Crossfire Hurricane file. You read the Steele dossier, which, according to the FBI's own internal review released in 2020, contained material that could not be verified, and that the FBI knew could not be verified. You knew the foundation was raw and uncorroborated, and you went on television 53 times and told the American people the foundation was solid." "Senator," Schiff started, "the Mueller report did document numerous contacts between Russians and the Trump campaign. The report did not exonerate, Senator, did not establish. Those are Mueller's own words. He chose them carefully. He had 2.5 years to find a charge. He could not. And Senator, between April 2019, when Mueller's report came out, and today, you've appeared on national television approximately 186 more times to discuss the Russia matter. On 0 of those appearances did you say, quote, 'I was wrong about the evidence,' end quote. 0. The Mont Blanc pen. Schiff was twisting the cap now. On, off, on, off. Kennedy reached for one more sheet, held it up. "Now, Senator, I want to talk about somebody who used to be your friend on television. The man who put you on his show 41 times between 2017 and 2020. The man who never once challenged your evidence. The man who agreed with every theory you advanced. Who is that, Senator Schiff?" I assume you mean Jake Tapper." "Senator, yes. CNN. 41 primetime interviews. The man liberals trusted to be tougher on Trump than anyone. The man who hosts The Lead every weekday afternoon." He pulled the final sheet. "Senator, on May 17, 2023, 6 days after the Durham report dropped, Jake Tapper sat in the same chair where he'd hosted you 41 times, and he looked into the camera and he said, quote, 'The Durham report is devastating for the FBI,' end quote." He set the paper down. "Senator, Jake Tapper, CNN, your favorite anchor, your most loyal platform, used the word devastating about the investigation you spent 3 years defending." He looked at Schiff over his glasses. "Senator, when Jake Tapper says you were wrong, the country has stopped pretending. Sonny Hostin, the former federal prosecutor, actually winced. The cameras caught it. Joy Behar looked at the floor. The Mont Blanc pen rolled out of Schiff's grip. He caught it before it left the table. Kennedy wasn't finished. The third folder was green. The seal read, U.S. House of Representatives, Resolution 437, censuring Adam B. Schiff. Senator, the Mueller investigation cost the American taxpayer $32 million. That figure is cited in the censure resolution that the United States House of Representatives passed against you on June 21, 2023. Bipartisan number not in dispute. He pulled the official cost analysis. $32 million. Senator, I want to put that in terms the folks watching this show today can feel. He set the sheet down, looked at the audience. The Federal Reserve Bank publishes a survey every year about American household finances. The most recent one, released 2 months ago, found that 63% of American households cannot afford a $400 emergency expense. 63%. Not a $4,000 emergency, a $400 emergency. A flat tire, a broken refrigerator, a trip to the dentist. He pulled out a small calculator from his breast pocket. Old, beat up, the kind a country lawyer carries because he doesn't trust his phone for math in front of cameras. $32 million divided by $400 apiece equals... He punched the buttons, held up the display. 80,000. 80,000 American working families. That's how many $400 emergencies could have been weathered with the money the Mueller probe spent. 80,000 mamas who could have replaced the refrigerator that died in August. 80,000 daddies who could have fixed the truck so they could get to the job site Monday morning. 80,000 emergency room visits that would not have ended in collection notices. He set the calculator down. And Senator, those 80,000 families paid for that money out of their paychecks, out of their tax returns, out of the dollars that did not buy school clothes for their kids in August. Senator, Schiff started, the investigation was independent. I did not control the budget, the cost. Senator, you did not control the budget, but you launched the narrative. You sat on the Intelligence Committee. You had the access. You went on television 53 times. You created the political pressure that made the investigation politically necessary. Without your 53 TV appearances, the Mueller probe doesn't happen. It doesn't last 2.5 years. It doesn't cost $32 million. You made it happen with your words, with your evidence that did not exist. The audience, 300 progressive Manhattan women, sat very still. The story had moved past politics. It was about money now. About the $400 emergency. They knew what that meant. Some of them had been there. Kennedy turned slightly toward Whoopi. Whoopi, I want to ask the audience something. The folks in this room, the folks watching at home in Iowa and Ohio and Pennsylvania, y'all know who paid for that $32 million. He looked at the cameras. Y'all paid for it. Out of your paychecks. Senator Schiff did not pay for it. The Russian government did not pay for it. Robert Mueller did not pay for it. You paid for it. A woman in the third row nodded slowly. The cameras caught it. Kennedy turned back to Schiff. Senator, I want to ask you a simple question. When did you intend to give the American people their $32 million back? Silence. Senator, not the principal, the money. When were you going to pay it back? Out of the $870,000 Maryland house, out of the Burbank condominium, out of the book advance from Lessons from the Brink. Senator, when were the 80,000 mamas who could have fixed their refrigerators going to get their money back? Schiff did not answer. The Mont Blanc pen rolled out of his hand, bounced once on the curved table, rolled 3 feet across the wood, rolled off the edge of the table, hit the studio floor with an audible click, rolled click, click, click across the polished hardwood, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. Came to rest under Whoopi Goldberg's chair. Whoopi looked down, looked up at Schiff. The cameras held. She bent down, picked up the Mont Blanc, held it across the table to Schiff. He reached for it. His hand was shaking visibly. He took it between thumb and forefinger, could not grip it. He set it on the table in front of him. His other hand went into his lap, out of view of the cameras. The pen sat on the table where his hand could not pick it up. The fourth folder was red. The cover was simple. H. Res. 437, Censure. Senator, June 21st, 2023. The United States House of Representatives, by a vote of 213 to 209, formally censured you. You stood in the well of the House. Speaker Kevin McCarthy read the resolution aloud. You were rebuked on the official record of the United States Congress for, quote, misleading the American public, end quote. He held up the resolution. You're the 25th member of the United States House of Representatives ever censured since 1789. 236 years of American history, 25 names. You're one of them. He paused. Now, Senator, when you walked back to your seat after the censure, the Democrats clapped for you. They cheered. You smiled. And in the hallway after, you spoke to reporters. You said, and I quote, I will wear this as a badge of honor, end quote. Kennedy looked up from the resolution. Senator, a badge of honor. He let it sit. Senator, the other 24 members of the United States House of Representatives who were censured in the history of this country. You know what they did? He turned the page. Number 23, Senator Joseph McCarthy, December 2nd, 1954, censured for abusing his Senate privileges to make wild accusations about communist infiltration he could not prove. He looked up over his glasses. Senator Joseph McCarthy, censured for, quote, making wild accusations he could not prove, end quote. Senator Schiff, you were censured for the exact same reason, 69 years apart. The historical company you keep, sir, is Joseph McCarthy. Joy Behar, who had said the words McCarthy and McCarthyism on this show at least 40 times in 15 years, always about Republicans, was looking at her coffee cup. Kennedy wasn't done. And Senator, there's one other name on the censure list I want to ask you about. Number 24. The person whose name appears immediately above yours. The name that comes right before Schiff on the list. Do you remember who that was? Representative Gosar, Schiff said quietly. Paul Gosar, Republican, Arizona, censured November 17, 2021, for posting a cartoon video the Democratic majority described as a depiction of violence against another member of Congress. He pulled a separate sheet. The congressional record from November 17, 2021. Senator, do you remember who led the floor debate against Paul Gosar? Silence. You did, Senator. He read, you stood at the well of the House on November 17, 2021. You said, and I quote from the congressional record, the conduct of Representative Gosar dishonors this institution. We must hold every member accountable regardless of party. The integrity of this body depends on it. End quote. He set the sheet down. You voted for Paul Gosar's censure, Senator. You called it a defense of the integrity of the House. And 19 months later, June 21st, 2023, you stood at that exact same well of the House. And the institution you said depended on accountability censured you. 25th name, right under Gosar. Same list, same well, same shame. The audience, 300 women. The room was as quiet as a library. A woman in the 6th row, early 60s, gray hair pulled back, with her pin she hadn't had the heart to take off in 9 years, said audibly, "Oh." The Mont Blanc pen sat on the curved table. Schiff's hands were both in his lap now. He could not pick the pen up. Senator, a badge of honor. You stood in the same well where you had condemned Paul Gosar. You took the same rebuke from the same institution for the same kind of conduct, and you called it a badge of honor. He closed the red folder. Now, Senator, we're going to talk about one more thing. The thing that put you on the censure list in the first place. The thing you did on the floor of the United States House of Representatives on September 26, 2019. The 5th folder was black. The cover was unmarked. Kennedy did not open it immediately. Senator, September 26, 2019. The first day of public hearings before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence regarding the impeachment inquiry of President Donald J. Trump. You were the chairman. You held the gavel. The cameras were on. C-SPAN was carrying live. Schiff stared at the table. Senator, you opened the hearing with a recitation. You said you were going to read into the record the contents of the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. The phone call at the heart of the impeachment inquiry. Kennedy opened the folder. You read it slowly. You read it dramatically. You read it for several minutes. You said the president had said, quote, I have a favor I want from you, though, and I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good, end quote. You said the president had said, quote, make up dirt on my political opponent, lots of it, end quote. You said the president had said, quote, lots of it on this and on that, end quote. You read these words to the American people as the chairman of the impeachment inquiry with C-SPAN carrying live. He set the page down, pulled out a second page. Senator, the actual transcript of the phone call, released by the White House on September 25, 2019, the day before your hearing, does not contain any of those words. He read the actual transcript section. The actual transcript shows the president saying, quote, "I would like you to do us a favor, though," end quote. That's what he said, 8 words. The president did not say, "make up dirt." The president did not say, "I'm going to say this only 7 times." The president did not say, "lots of it." You made those words up, Senator. You wrote dialogue. You delivered fictional quotes under the cover of congressional privilege to the American people on C-SPAN from the chairman's seat of the impeachment inquiry. The studio, 300 Manhattan women. Some of them had watched that hearing live. Some of them had cheered Schiff that night. They were watching their own memory be rewritten in real time. Kennedy pulled the 3rd page. Senator, when Republicans confronted you on the same day, within hours of your fictional reading, you said, and I quote your exact words from the floor, "It was meant to be, at least in part, a parody." End quote. He looked up. A parody. He let the words sit. Senator, the transcript of a phone call that became the basis of impeaching the President of the United States, the 3rd presidential impeachment in American history, the constitutional crisis of 2019, and your contribution as chairman of the inquiry was a parody, made-up fiction read into the official record. Senator, that was clearly framed as commentary, Schiff said weakly. Senator, the American people watching C-SPAN that morning did not know it was a parody. You did not announce it as a parody. You read it as the contents of a real phone call. You used the chairman's authority. You used the dignity of the House Intelligence Committee. You used the cover of congressional privilege to deliver fictional quotes about the President of the United States to launch an impeachment that would cost the American taxpayer $27 million. He pulled the final page. And Senator, the censure resolution against you in 2023, Resolution 437, the official document that put your name on the list with Joseph McCarthy and Paul Gosar. It cites specifically the parody transcript of September 26, 2019, as one of the 4 reasons for your censure. He set the page down. Senator, the conduct that put you in the history books with Joe McCarthy was that you wrote fictional dialogue and read it into the record of the United States Congress to launch an impeachment of a sitting president. You did this on C-SPAN with cameras rolling as the chairman of the inquiry. He closed the black folder. Senator, I'm going to ask the audience, the folks in this room, to think about something. What does the country call a man who writes fake dialogue and presents it as the words of the President of the United States in an official congressional proceeding to launch the impeachment of that president? He paused. In Louisiana, we have a word for that. It has 2 syllables, starts with F. The audience did not laugh this time. The audience knew. Some of them put their hands to their mouths. Joy Behar, who had defended every Schiff appearance for 6 years, stared at the photograph of Schiff still showing on the studio monitor behind the table. She did not look at Schiff himself. The Mont Blanc pen sat on the curved table. Schiff was making no attempt to pick it up. Kennedy did not put the folders away. He left them in a row on the curved table. Brown, blue, green, red, black, open, visible to the cameras. Senator Schiff, I'm going to ask you 3 simple yes or no questions. The American people deserve answers. The folks watching this show, the folks watching at home. They deserve a yes or a no. Whoopi did not interrupt. Sonny Hostin sat very still. Question 1. Senator, did you sign federal mortgage documents claiming Maryland was your primary residence, while at the same time claiming California was your primary residence on state tax forms? Silence. Senator, yes or no? I cannot. The matter is under... Schiff stammered. Yes or no, Senator? Schiff did not answer. Question 2. Senator, did you go on national television 53 times saying you had seen evidence of Russian collusion, that the Mueller report and the Durham report concluded did not exist. Silence. Senator, yes or no? Senator, the Mueller report documented numerous. The report did not exonerate. Senator, the question is whether the evidence existed. The special counsel said, did not establish. That is a no. Did you say on television it existed? Yes or no? Schiff did not answer. Question 3. Senator, on September 26, 2019, did you read fictional dialogue into the official record of the House Intelligence Committee, presenting it as the contents of a phone call between two sitting presidents to launch an impeachment that cost the American taxpayer $27 million? Silence. The studio. 300 women. The cameras held on Schiff's face. Senator, yes or no? Schiff said nothing. The pens sat on the table. His hands were in his lap. His head was down. Whoopi Goldberg waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. She turned to the camera. Senator Schiff, would you like to respond to the 3 questions? Schiff did not look up. Senator? Nothing. Senator Schiff, would you like to take a moment? Schiff's hand moved slightly in his lap. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. The cameras caught it. Whoopi looked at Joy, at Sonny, at Sarah. None of them spoke. Whoopi turned back to the camera. Her voice was the voice she'd used on this show for 16 years. The warm, host of a living room voice. We're going to take a commercial break. The director cut to commercial. The studio audience did not applaud. The studio audience did not boo. The studio audience sat in the silence of 300 people who had walked into the studio that morning thinking they were going to watch one thing and had walked out watching something else entirely. When The View came back from commercial break 4 minutes later, Adam Schiff was still in his chair. He had not left, had not stood, had not picked up the pen. He had sat through the entire commercial break with his head down and his hands in his lap. Whoopi did not return to him, did not ask another question. She turned to Senator Kennedy. Senator, would you like to make a closing statement? Kennedy did not stand, did not raise his voice. He spoke to Whoopi and to the audience and to the cameras the way a man speaks at his neighbor's kitchen table when the neighbor has been doing something they should not have been doing and the conversation has become unavoidable. Whoopi, I appreciate the chance. I'm sorry that the segment had to take this turn. I did not come here to embarrass anyone. I came here because the network invited me. They thought I might be a contrast to Senator Schiff. I did not know when I packed this briefcase last night in my hotel room that we would end up where we are. He gestured at the 5 folders. But ma'am, I did not bring nothing to this stage that was not already public. The mortgage referral is public. The TV transcripts are public. The Mueller report is public. The Durham report is public. The censure resolution is public. The parody transcript is in the congressional record. Every receipt I read out today was sitting in plain view. The country's been able to see it for years. The newspapers chose not to cover it. The networks chose not to ask about it. And men like Senator Schiff went on telling the country one thing while the record said another. He turned to face the audience directly. 300 progressive Manhattan women. Folks, I know I'm not your favorite kind of senator. I know I'm from Louisiana. I know I have an accent. I know I voted against many things you support. That's fine. That's what democracy looks like. We disagree. Then we get up the next morning and we keep working. He paused. But what we just witnessed, that's something different. That's what happens when a public servant treats the American people like they cannot read, like they cannot read a financial disclosure, like they cannot read a Mueller report, like they cannot read an Inspector General's memo. Senator Schiff went on television for 9 years telling the American people things he knew were not true. And when he was finally asked, under no oath, on a daytime show in front of a friendly audience, to defend it, he could not. He looked at Whoopi, looked at Joy Behar. Ma'am, I have respected this show for many years. I disagree with most of what is said on it, but I respect the people who sit at this table. Y'all have a real platform. Y'all reach real Americans every morning over their coffee. And what I would ask of y'all, for the country, not for my party, is the same thing I would ask of any journalist. He paused. Tell the truth, even when it ain't your politics, even when it embarrasses your guests, even when the man across the table is from a party you disagree with. He looked at the audience. Because the country is tired of being lied to by Republicans and by Democrats. They're starving for the truth. They will reward the people who tell it to them, and they will remember for a long time the people who didn't. He picked up the briefcase. Whoopi, Joy, Sonny, Sarah, thank you for having me. I would like to invite y'all down to Madisonville sometime. My cousin Thibodeau runs a bait shop in Zachary, sells worms and shiners and live crawfish to fishermen. He don't care what your politics are. He'll boil you up a mess of crawfish and you can sit on the porch and watch the sunset over the Chifuncta River. Don't care what party you're in either. He stood. Bonjour, mes amis. Stay out of trouble. He walked off the set. The cameras held on his back as he walked past Whoopi, past the empty chair where Schiff still sat, past the audience, out through the side door of the studio. For 3 full seconds, the studio was silent. Then the audience did something the View audience had not done in 16 years. They stood up. All 300 of them, progressive Manhattan women in I'm With Her pins and AOC shirts and squad scarves, stood up, and they applauded. 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Whoopi Goldberg looked at the cameras. She did not stop the applause. She let it run. The cameras held the wide shot. Adam Schiff sat in his chair, head down, the Mont Blanc pen sitting on the table where he could not pick it up, surrounded by 300 standing women applauding the man who had just walked out the door. The clip went viral within 20 minutes. The network's social media team uploaded the segment to YouTube without commentary. 2 hours later, the wide shot of Schiff seated alone, surrounded by the standing audience, became the most shared cable news image of the year. Schiff's office issued a statement at 4 p.m. Eastern. Senator Schiff stands by his record of public service and looks forward to addressing the matters raised in the appropriate forum. The statement did not address the empty pen on the table. The Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed 3 days later that the grand jury had been impaneled. A week after that, Schiff announced he was suspending media appearances to focus on Senate business. 2 weeks after that, the Burbank condominium was relisted on the California real estate market. The book, Lessons from the Brink, fell off the New York Times bestseller list within 9 days. The publisher canceled the paperback rollout in March. Whoopi Goldberg never spoke publicly about the segment again. Joy Behar mentioned it once on her podcast in February. She said only, "Country lawyer is a smarter man than most of us gave him credit for." Sonny Hostin, the former federal prosecutor, submitted a written statement to the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office 2 days after the show. The contents of her statement have not been released. Senator John Kennedy returned to Louisiana on the Tuesday evening flight from LaGuardia to New Orleans. He did not give a single interview about the appearance. The senator did not need to. The country had watched. The records remained. Madisonville, Louisiana, 3 days after the show. Senator Kennedy, on his back porch above the Chifuncta River, Spanish moss in the cypress, the water running slow and brown, the way it had run for 10,000 years before there was anyone there to notice. His cousin Thibodeau pulled up in the rust-colored 1994 Chevrolet pickup with a cooler of live crawfish in the bed. Same truck Thibodeau had been keeping alive with parts from 3 other trucks for 14 years. Thibodeau climbed out, carried the cooler up to the porch, set it down, sat in the second wicker chair, did not say anything for a while. "John," Thibodeau said, "we had the View on at the bait shop in Zachary. I don't know why. Boudreaux's old TV barely picks up the channel, but the boys was watching. The fellas who come in for shiners on Tuesday morning, they was watching that show. Kennedy nodded, looked at the river. They liked it, John. The boys at the bait shop. The boys who voted Trump 3 times, who think MSNBC is communist, who would not normally watch The View if you paid them. They was watching, and they was quiet through the whole thing. And when you walked off, Thibodeau Jr., who's 23 and who ain't never paid attention to politics in his life, Thibodeau Jr. stood up in the bait shop and he saluted the TV. Kennedy did not respond for a long time. A young reporter from a small paper in Slidell pulled into the gravel driveway. He was 24, had grown up in Madisonville. His grandfather had voted for Kennedy 3 times. He stood at the foot of the porch steps and asked permission before climbing them. "Senator," he said, "I have one question." Kennedy nodded. "What did America see on The View?" Kennedy watched the river for a while. A turtle slid off a cypress log. 2 egrets stood in the shallows on the far bank. Somewhere upriver, a fisherman cut his outboard motor. "Son," he said, "America saw a senator who could not answer plain questions about his own houses, his own evidence, his own censure, his own impeachment. That isn't a debate problem. That is a character problem." The reporter waited. "Tell folks the receipts didn't come from me. They came from the Federal Housing Finance Agency. They came from Robert Mueller. They came from John Durham. They came from the United States House of Representatives. They came from the Congressional Record. I just read them out." He looked at Thibodeau, looked at the cooler. "Now, if you'll excuse me, son, we got crawfish to boil." The reporter nodded, turned off his recorder, thanked the senator, walked back to his car, drove away. Thibodeau poured the live crawfish into the steel pot under the carport, added the seasoning, lit the burner. The water began to come up to a boil. What happened in the View studio on that Tuesday morning was not the destruction of one senator's career. It was the unmasking of a model. The model was simple. Go on national television 53 times saying things you knew were not in the evidence. Accept the protection of partisan media for 9 years. Sign federal documents misrepresenting your primary residence. Launch the impeachment of a sitting president by reading fictional dialogue into the record of the House Intelligence Committee. Accept censure as a badge of honor. Write a memoir titled Lessons from the Brink. Sell it on a friendly daytime show and walk away. The model worked for 9 years. It did not survive 60 Minutes with an old man, a beat-up briefcase, and 5 folders. Adam Schiff was given every chance to defend his record. He could not, because you cannot defend under questioning what you have only said out loud. The pen rolled under the host's chair. The chair the senator sat in was empty by the end of the week. The records remained,